Hi, everyone. My name is Aubrey George. I'm the Director of Grants and Sponsored Programs at JSTD. Thank you for joining us for our JSTD LifeHomeTech webinar. JSTD is a multifaceted provider of services for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities based in Livingston, New Jersey. We offer residential services. We have homes in Morris and Essex counties. We have an innovative day habilitation program called the Way Center. We also offer therapeutic services and our Home to Heidi Gallery, which is a public art venue committed to inclusive and accessible programming. We launched JSD LifeHomeTech in the summer of 2023 with a grant from the federal government. Susan Nasberg-Abrams is here today. She will provide more information about LifeHomeTech. Before we move on to Susan, I have a few reminders. Please stay muted throughout the presentation. We'll have a brief Q&A at the end. This session is being recorded. Feel free to keep your camera off if you're more comfortable. And we will be adding directions for closed captioning into the chat. They were also included in the reminder that was sent to you with the Zoom link. Thank you for being here today. And without further delay, I'm going to pass it on to Susan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Susan Nasberg-Abrams, and I'm the project coordinator of LifeHomeTech, which means that I run the day-to-day implementation of this program. So for those of you who weren't at our previous webinars, I'd like to introduce you to what is LifeHomeTech. LifeHomeTech is an initiative at JSTD to promote an improved quality of life, including enhancing community connection, engagement, independence, safety, and accessibility for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, autism, and those that are aging in place. We're committed to always using a person-centered approach, which means that we look at the specific needs of every individual before we implement or recommend any piece of technology. LifeHomeTech is working on many initiatives. One is to integrate appropriate enabling technology into our JSTD residential homes. We're also working to educate others in the broader community about how enabling technology can benefit those with IDD. That's why we developed this webinar series. So before we get started with today's session, I just want to introduce the rest of our team. You already met Aubrey. Jessica Goldstein is the Associate Manager of Programs, Outreach, and Communications. Along with Aubrey, she helped to secure us this grant. So you'll hear from her a little more later. Randy Lesser is the Director of Quality Assurance for Technology. She oversees compliance standards and leverages tech systems to ensure high-quality service. She's working the back end of our Zoom today. Tatiana Copeland is the Project Assistant for LifeHomeTech. She helps out with the day-to-day process of making this grant happen. Tatiana will be watching the chat, so if you have any questions, we encourage you to ask them in the chat, and Tatiana will make sure they are answered. We're excited to have Barbra Seltzer lead today's webinar. Barbara?
Hello. Is this working properly? I see. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for having me here today. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see my slides. Again, I want to thank you for inviting me. This is a topic I'm very passionate about, and I find that not a lot of people know about it and understand how they can benefit or how to access AAC services. So it's a lot of information, and what I'm going to try to do, what I've designed for today is an overview. Hopefully, I will touch on a little bit of everything, so you'll get enough information to start, and I will share my contact information at the end, so that if you have further questions, you can absolutely reach out. Sorry, my slides are not progressing here. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this is just an introduction about me and who I am and what I do. My name is Barbra Seltzer. I'm a speech and language pathologist, and I'm also an ATP, which is an assistive technology professional. My focus in my practice is working with individuals with complex communication needs. I work with children and adults, many of whom require AAC. So my practice is located in northern New Jersey, and I do evaluations and intervention for people who would benefit from AAC. And I've also done some work at JSTD at the Way Center, so it's nice to be back. Today, we are going to do a general overview, as I said, on AAC. And what we're going to talk about first is, what is AAC? I think a lot of people are confused about that and have some misconceptions about what it is. So we will be clarifying that. Second, we're going to talk about who can benefit from AAC. Again, another area where there's a lot of misconceptions and myths. And I hope to clarify that so that if you can benefit from it, or someone in your family can benefit from it, or someone who you service can benefit from it, you will now know. Third, we're going to talk about what AAC evaluations look like, what they are, who can do them, and you'll have an explanation of what to expect and how to seek out an AAC evaluation. Fourth, we're going to talk about strategies, because once an AAC evaluation is done, it's not over. Now you need to learn how to use your system. You need to learn how to use the equipment and how to integrate it into your person's life. So we will go over that. Fifth, we're going to go over some myths and facts about all the topics we have previously discussed. And lastly, we're going to talk about funding evaluations and equipment through your DDD budget. So as I said, I do AAC evaluations for a wide variety of individuals. I do AAC evaluations in school districts. For kids, I do them privately for kids and adults. And I am a provider with DDD, so I do many evaluations that are funded by DDD, and I recommend equipment that is funded by DDD. So we're going to start at the beginning. What is AAC? AAC is not just an iPad, but we will get to that. So AAC is augmentative and alternative communication. And what that means is augmentative refers to systems and tools that are used to develop, support, and or expand communication beyond what someone can say using speech. So basically that means that for some people, AAC augments their speech. The technology augments what they can say orally. So it could be to clarify, it can be to expand, it can help them to develop their language further. That's the augmentative piece. Alternative is for people who are unable to speak at all. And there are people who are what we call an anarthric, so that they may try, but they're not able to get any speech out for motoric reasons or for language reasons. They just can't get any speech out, but they can use the system. So in that case, it's an alternative to speech. But did you know that we all actually use AAC? So if you think about it this way, it's a little less of an overwhelming, daunting thought. None of us only use speech to communicate. When we talk, we point, we have facial expression, we have intonation, we all text. All of these things are methods of communication that are not speech. So this is AAC. A lot of times I get asked if ASL is AAC, and it is not, because it is a full language in of itself with syntax and grammar, and it's ableist to consider ASL AAC. It is a language. However, sometimes the way we use it with our people who have IDDDD, where we're using one sign here and there, or a modified sign here or there, that we can consider AAC because it is augmenting perhaps the speech they have or as an alternative to the speech that they have. Okay. Within the topic of within AAC, there are different types of AAC. So again, going back to AAC is not just an iPad. Aided AAC is AAC that requires tools outside of the individual. It's a form of assistive technology. Assistive technology is not just AAC, but AAC that is aided is a form of assistive technology. There are low-tech and high-tech forms of aided AAC. So aided AAC can be an iPad with an AAC application. It could also be a dedicated speech generating device. These are high-tech forms. It could also be a communication board, a manual communication board, or a communication book. Those are low-tech forms, and they all have their value and their place. Unaided AAC is the AAC we were referring to previously. It's AAC that requires nothing other than the individual's bodies, things like facial expression, gesture, vocalizations. All of those augment what you can communicate with speech. Okay. Now, who can benefit from AAC? So this is a really, really important topic. There's a lot of misconceptions out there regarding this. Anyone who can't meet their current communication needs through speech is a candidate. They can benefit from AAC. And we're going to go into this a little bit further, but there are no prerequisites for AAC. So when I went to school and I first started in the field, which was a while ago, we used to think that people had to progress through a series of steps before they could be a candidate for a high-tech AAC device. So we used to have goals to match objects to objects and pictures to objects and pictures to pictures. And once they could do that, then they could get to the next level. And now we know through research that this is not true. And we should not consider somebody not a candidate because they have not achieved certain other goals. There are no prerequisites for AAC. So who are AAC users? They can be children, they can be adults, they can be non-speakers, they can be partial speakers, they can be unintelligible speakers. Again, there are no prerequisites. Some AAC speakers speak some of the time. So this is something that a lot of people are surprised by, but there are individuals who even can speak fluently and clearly some of the time. But a lot of these people are autistic and they can't access their language some of the time. So maybe during times of anxiety or with unfamiliar communication partners, they might prefer to use a voice output system, like a text-based system or a symbol-based system. Some people use AAC because their speech is not intelligible. So they might be intelligible, they might be easily understood by their familiar communication partners, but maybe they're not by unfamiliar communication partners. So maybe with the family, they can rely completely on their speech, but if we want them to be more independent in the community, then they would benefit from an AAC system. And I always tell my clients, I would rather see them using AAC to order independently in a restaurant than relying on their mom when they're 40 years old to translate for them. So some AAC users speak some of the time. If somebody can speak, it does not mean they're not a candidate. You don't need to be able to point to use AAC. So it still comes up for me that people will not make a referral or think somebody's not a candidate because they don't have use of their upper extremities. This is not true. This is another myth. Some people access AAC through pointing and using their hands, but some people use their feet. Some people use a switch and they could access the switch with their hand or with their feet or with their head or even with a slight muscle movement. There's incredible technology out there now. Some people use eye gaze. So they're looking, and we will talk about this a little more later too, but motoric limitations do not make somebody not a candidate for AAC. People with vision and or hearing deficits can use AAC. So if somebody is visually impaired in any way, they can still be a candidate for AAC. If they have cortical impairment, which means that there's nothing wrong with their eyes, but they can't process the visual information, we can make adaptations to the symbols using color contrasts so that they can benefit from the visual input. If they're completely visually impaired, they can rely on auditory scanning. If they're hearing impaired, they can rely on their vision. And even people who are deafblind can use AAC because we'll use tactile symbols, which is a lot easier now that people have 3D printers. So This is a quote that I'm going to read because I think it's really important. There's only one prerequisite I said there's no prerequisites, but there is one prerequisite, and that is that you can breathe. You do need to be alive. That's really important. So we've discovered, I'm not even going to say that you have to breathe on your own. There are people who are on ventilators who use AAC, but you do need to be alive. So we've discovered increasingly that communication has only one prerequisite. It has nothing to do with mental age, chronological age, prerequisite skills, mathematical formulae, or any of the other models that have been developed to decide who is an AAC candidate and who is not. Breathing is the only prerequisite that is relevant to communication. Breathing equals life, and life equals communication. It's that simple. So again, no prerequisites. AAC evaluations, what do they look like and who can conduct them? This is super important. Sometimes I get calls from support coordinators. I have a client who wants an iPad, or I have a client whose mom wants them to get Proloquo to go on an iPad. That's not what an AAC evaluation is. An AAC evaluation is a process, and it's a process that some of us are trained to do, and we're going to go through what that should look like and who should do it so that you know what you're looking for. And this is just a little confused emoji because there's so many choices. So AAC evaluations are multifaceted. We have to look at a lot of different things. And I want to mention that this involves a team. So perhaps I'm the evaluator and I come in and I'm doing the evaluation, but I need to gain my information by speaking to other specialists. So one of the things that AAC evaluations look at is access. And that's what we were talking about before. Is the person able to access what we call direct select by pointing or by using eye gaze, or do we need to scan? So we need to look at their motor skills for access. If it's a very simple situation, then I can make that determination on my own. If it's somebody who is receiving occupational therapy, I'll consult with the occupational therapist to get the information so that I can make the appropriate recommendation. Mobility. Somebody's ambulatory, we want to look and see, we want independence to be as great as possible. So can they go and retrieve a device and carry it? What weight would be best for them to be able to carry? Are they non-ambulatory? If they're in a wheelchair, then we need to consider a mount. If they're in a motorized wheelchair, then we might want to do something and they need a switch, we might want to try to do something so that the switch is going to be coordinated. So again, depending on the situation, I'm not a mobility specialist, so I'm going to consult with the physical therapist. Well, I was going to talk about assistive technology professionals, but I'm going to go into that after. Vision and hearing, same thing. It might be as simple as me finding out that there was a vision and a hearing test done, and I can review the records, and vision and hearing are totally intact, so there's nothing that needs to be modified there. But if somebody's cortically impaired, then we need to take a look at how we can modify symbols. It could be sometimes someone's vision is stronger in one field than in another, so we need to mount something or place something on a table in a certain place. But it always has to be considered. Language. So we need to do a language assessment to see what expressive and receptive language is like. Always has to be considered. Sometimes we get a referral and we're hearing that the person has very, very low language skills. And I say, well, how can you even judge their language skills if they don't have a method of output? So that all needs to be taken into consideration. Same thing with cognition. I'm very hesitant to consider classifications of cognition on somebody who is severely communicatively impaired. How do you make that judgment? I've done AAC evaluations on people who have on their ISP that they're profoundly intellectually impaired, and they're not. And once I get them a communication device, they're advocating for themselves, and they're expressing themselves very clearly. So it's something you have to consider very carefully. Literacy. We want to look at somebody's current literacy development or potential for literacy. Do they want a text? Are we going to look at a text-based system, or are we going to look at a symbol-based system? AAC can help somebody to develop literacy as well, because if you're non-speaking, and the terminology, by the way, is not nonverbal, it's non-speaking. Nonverbal means you have no words, and we really can't assume that somebody doesn't have knowledge of words in their brain if they have no way of getting it out. Non-speaking means that they can't speak motorically. So that's the terminology that we use now, and the autistic community has made it very clear that they're much more comfortable with that. Two other areas that we need to look at. We need to look at daily communication needs and environment. So where do they need to use their communication device? This is very important. I recently did an evaluation on a man who is working in a factory, and I made my decision about the language system, but we have to look at the hardware. And his mom pointed out that he can't bring anything with him to work that's larger than would fit in his pocket. So we got him a pocket-sized device, which if he could not access it, then we would have to look at maybe appealing to his employers using ADA. But since he was able to, that was an important feature for him. Communication partners and supports, very important. Communication partners are going to need to help the individual learn how to use the system by modeling on it. So although I look most at what's best and what works best for the individual, if all things are equal, I need to also consider how family feels comfortable and the communication partners feel comfortable modeling on the system, because if it's not going to be used, it's not going to be used. We're going to have device abandonment. So the evaluator does not just get an iPad. The evaluator identifies the features needed by the AAC user and then matches them with the features available in various systems to identify the best system for an individual. And we call that feature matching. This looks at physical systems like, are we going to go with a tablet? Are we going to go with a communication book? Are we going to go with a dedicated device? And then once we decide on that, we have to also decide on what language system we're going to use. This is accomplished by trialing a variety of systems. Best practice is to consider and or trial 3 systems. The evaluation report should include specific equipment recommendations as well as recommendations for intervention. Now, who can evaluate? So, evaluators should be a licensed speech language pathologist. They should be experienced in working with AAC, and they should be collaborative. So, has to be a speech and language pathologist. My other 3 letters, ATP, Assistive Technology Professional, comes from the rehab engineering. RESNA. I'm sorry, I forget what the acronym stands for. We take an exam. ATPs can be speech pathologists, but they can also be occupational therapists, physical therapists, special educators, and for different things, you need an ATP with different areas of expertise. So I'm an ATP, but if I get a call from a support coordinator looking for somebody to adapt an apartment, I'm going to refer to somebody whose expertise is in that area. An ATP who is an occupational therapist should refer to a speech pathologist for an AAC evaluation. And not all speech pathologists are experienced in AAC. You also need to, the AAC evaluator needs to be collaborative, like I referred to earlier. You need to just talk with the family, most importantly, the individual. A lot of times it just comes down to what their preference is. And you need to consider the whole team. AAC evaluators should not be vendors. If they're a vendor from many companies that are very good and they have representatives, and the representatives should be able to come out and show you a device, but if they're doing the evaluation, that's a red flag because they're making money from it. an AAC evaluator should not be invested in any company. What I recommend, I don't get anything from. I'm recommending what's best for you. They shouldn't be vendors. They shouldn't be company reps. They shouldn't be unilaterally making a decision. We need to consider the whole team, and most importantly, the user. Okay. I'm not stopping for questions because we're going to do them at the end, right? Okay. So implementation strategies and how to learn them. Once we have made our recommendations, there needs to be a period of implementation. You can't just hand somebody a system and expect them to be able to use it. Sometimes people expect, when I put recommendations for equipment in a report, that the individual should be able to use it right then and there. And that's not what we're looking for. When we do the evaluation, we're looking to see interest, we're looking to see exploration, and we're deciding what will be the best system with the best prognosis, the best potential. But then they first need to be trained. And one of the major goals in therapy is going to be to train communication partners. And that means communication partners at home, communication partners at school or work or day program, because it needs to be used all the time. The system needs to be used all the time, not just in school or not just in day program, not just out in the community. So it needs to go everywhere the person goes, just like your vocal cords do. So therapy with an SLP experienced in AAC is necessary to learn how to use the system, and it takes time. As I just said, the evaluation identifies the best system, but it does not mean they'll be instantly fluent with the system. For intervention, time and patience are necessary, and communication partner training is vital for success. You think about learning a language, that's essentially what it is. And, the person needs to have practice and experience, and they need to learn to see it as a communication system. So they need to see others using it. Some important strategies. Probably the most important strategy is aided language input. We don't teach someone how to use a communication system by matching or doing trials or doing work. They need to learn it by speaking with it and hearing others speak with it. So the example that I always give is if you want to learn a foreign language, you need to be immersed in it. The way we teach languages in the United States in school doesn't work. So that's why even after years and years and years of taking Spanish, I still don't speak Spanish. I know some words, right? I know papel and pluma, but if you put me in a room with people who speak Spanish, I'm going to fail royally, even though I'm pretty sure I got A's all the way through because I was a very good student. So to learn AAC use, it's the same thing. And I'd like to show you a little video. It's very short. But it will illustrate what aided language input is. I think I shared my audio. We discussed this, but if I didn't, tell me and I'll go back and reshare. Can you hear it?
No, we can't.
Okay, I didn't. Let me just reshare it. Ian, you told me to remember to do that. I didn't. Okay. Okay. Now it should be good. Okay, back to my slides. Okay. So that's just an example of really what it needs to look like. First of all, it takes months and months and months, and we all need to use it. We all need to use the system with the person. It's again, it's not trials, it's not work. It's showing them that this is their voice. Another important strategy, and again, I mean, I could do a whole webinar, and I have on strategies, but just a little bit of an overview. Attributing meaning is really important. When babies first learn to talk, they babble, right? And then maybe they say something that sounds like mama, and then mama gets really excited, and then they learn that that's mama. Usually it really may not have even met mama in the beginning. Same thing happens with communication systems. We have to let people have the opportunity to explore and attribute meaning to what they're saying. So don't assume that they're stimming. Don't assume. But say, oh, I think he's just touching it. And well, how do you know that? You know, how do you know that? Presume competence, which is, am I frozen?
Just for a second, but you came back.
Okay, good. What happened here? Whoops. All right, let me go back to where I was. So, okay. Sorry, guys. Okay. So if we attribute meaning, first of all, you're validating their communication, which is really important. We always want to do that. And it becomes a learning moment. If they didn't mean it, then it becomes a learning moment. That's how you learn. And that brings us to our next strategy, which is always presume competence. You always want to, why would you want to presume that they don't know what they're saying? Presume competence. And here I have this video. Do you guys see this from the World Down Syndrome? Okay, I'm going to show it. Just a disclaimer, there's like a curse in it. We're all adults. Is that okay? Okay.
Hey, bartender, you assume?
Now you can hear it, right? And everything. Okay.
That I cannot drink a margarita. So you don't serve me a margarita? So I don't drink a margarita. Your assumption becomes reality. And parents, you assume that I cannot live on my own. So you don't encourage me to live on my own. So I don't live on my own. Coach, you assume that I cannot hit harder. So you don't train me to hit harder. So I don't hit harder. And teacher, you assume that I cannot learn Shakespeare. So you don't teach me Shakespeare.
Old MacDonald had a farm.
So I don't learn Shakespeare. E-I-E-I-O. But hey, if all your assumptions become reality, then assume that I can drink a margarita. So you serve me a margarita. So I drink a margarita. Assume that I can live on my own. So I live on my own. Assume that I can hit harder. So I hit harder. Assume that I can learn Shakespeare. So, what fools these mortals be? I learned fucking Shakespeare. You assume I can't swear, right? Assume that I can do that job. That I can go to parties. That I can have sex. That I can be on stage. Assume that I can. So maybe I will.
I love that. So when we start looking at language systems also, people would always say, well, that's too much. That's too many words. Give them 6 words. They have to be able to choose from 6 words. But again, research shows we want to give them a robust system. We want to give them as much language as they can visually and motorically handle, because and facts somewhat quickly. There are many myths that persist, so we're going to dispel a few. Again, I have done a whole presentation on myths and facts, so I just picked a few for today. Myth or fact, if you can't identify pictures, you can't use AAC. Now you know, because I mentioned this before, that this is a myth. Identifying pictures by label is a receptive language task. So not being able to do this does not mean someone cannot use pictures to communicate. In addition, they're a vocabulary organization that's based on motor planning. It helps people who can't identify pictures by label to use them to communicate. Finally, apraxia can influence a person's ability to point on demand, but if they actually want to say something, then they can do it. So just to clarify that quickly, and for people who may not be familiar with all these terms, motor planning has to do with how your body just kind of knows physically where something is. It's motor learning. When you use your phone with your apps or a keyboard, you don't have to look. You know where A, S, D, F, G. You just know because it's motor learning. If somebody moved around all the apps on your phone, you'd be very upset because you probably don't even look at them. You know how to get to Facebook or your messages. So the task of being able to point to cup, point to cup, point to cup doesn't mean that somebody can't go to find the picture of cup to say, you know, I like that cup or I need a cup. Myth or fact, severe physical disabilities preclude use of AAC. We know that's a myth because we discussed that before too. There are many access methods available for AAC users, and a thorough AAC evaluation should consider an individual's physical disabilities and identify the best means of accessing a device. Myth or fact, high-tech AAC is not appropriate for individuals with challenging behaviors. This is huge, very important. I get this a lot too. We can't get them an AAC device. They'll throw it, they'll break it. They break everything in the house. Well, challenging behaviors are often the only way an individual can communicate. So to me, the challenging behavior is actually an indication that they need AAC. We should never assume that an individual who exhibits challenging behaviors cannot benefit from AAC. If I couldn't communicate, I would throw things too. I would break things because that's all that they have. Sometimes we also have to look at how the AAC is being implemented. So sometimes the individual may specifically throw the iPad, the speech generating device, the communication book. Well, when I look at it a little more closely, I see that the reason is because somebody's sitting and doing ABA trials with them on it. It's not their voice. It's another thing that they have to do and possibly that they feel like they're failing at, that they're being tested on. So rather than thinking that challenging behaviors are something that precludes AAC, I think we need to look at ourselves when an implementation. Do not overwhelm users with too many symbols when introducing AAC. Myth. If a user is not provided with more symbols than they have mastery of, then they have no opportunity to explore and practice new symbols. Providing more symbols also allows for more efficient aided language stimulation. So again, we're going to go back and think about a typical language learner. For those of you who have or have been exposed to typical language learning children, we don't not talk to them until they can say a word. We don't not say anything until they said mama, now we can say mama, or right? We speak to and around children all the time, and then they gradually start to use the words. So same thing with an AAC system. We will provide them with a lot of words so that we can model on it. In therapy, the therapist may, at their discretion, need to hide words, to target certain words. But if you get somebody recommending a system with like 8 words on it or even 20 words on it, then I think you have to think that that's a problem. That's not generally what we recommend at this point. Okay, now we're getting towards the end, which is good. It's like 7:45. Funding evaluations and equipment through DDD. So this is the process. This presentation is really focused on people who are using their DDD budget. So the first step for getting an AAC evaluation is the referral. You need to speak with your support coordinator and get a referral to a qualified DDD approved AT evaluator. So again, this goes under the umbrella of assistive technology. And somebody who can accept your DDD budget needs to be on the DDD approved list. I always recommend, before you get that put into the plan, speak with the provider or speak with a couple of providers that you're referred to be sure that they have the qualifications we discussed and to be sure that you feel comfortable. I mean, you always want to do a little research with any provider. But because the list is assistive technology evaluators and DDD is not so clear on what all of this means, your support coordinator may refer you to an assistive technology provider who is not a speech and language pathologist. Maybe there's somebody who can sell you the equipment. That's not who you want to use. Once you get to that point, you need to get the service added to the ISP because that needs to happen. That's how DDD funding works. For anything, you need in order for the provider to be able to bill, it has to be in the plan. So AAC evaluations fall under the category of AT evaluations. The code is T2028HI. In terms of what the fee is for an AAC evaluation, it's reasonable and customary. So I can't tell you what every provider charges. So that's something that you need to talk to the provider about, and the support coordinator will need to speak with them so that they can get it added to the plan. That's to fund the evaluation. Once the evaluation is, you can also, of course, go through your medical insurance. Most people who are funded through DDD have Medicaid, but then you would need to have a Medicaid provider. So that I'm not I accept DDD Medicaid, but I'm not a Medicaid provider. So that you have to look in a different listing. It's like with anything we have to look for our health insurance. But let's say you get your evaluation done through DDD, which they generally do approve it. It's not difficult to get it approved. Then you need to get the report after the evaluation's done. When the report is done, you can either get the equipment funded through DDD or you can get it funded through insurance, depending what's recommended. So for somebody who has a lot of physical disabilities and is going to require some alternative access like eye gaze, that's going to be a very expensive device. It'd be like $12,000. Most people are not going to be able to fund that through their DDD budget, but that can be funded through insurance. So the evaluator, when they're looking at the individual and they see what type of equipment the person needs, then they should be able to guide you towards the best way to fund it. If it is a simple iPad with an application, then that will usually be able to be funded by DDD if there's enough money in the person's budget. And what DDD will require is a report from one of their approved providers. Sometimes we see I will get a call from somebody who is aging out of the school system. They're just hitting 21 and they had equipment, and now the equipment is being taken back by the school district, but everybody's very happy with the equipment. They don't want a whole new evaluation. So if they've had a recent evaluation in the school, that can be submitted and DDD will accept it. There's no reason to have a whole new evaluation unless you want to look for something different. So once that happens and you've got your equipment funded and it comes, then we need to have follow-up therapy as we discussed. So there should be, for me, when I do my evals, I include an initial setup and training session. That'll be like an hour. I'll usually offer a Zoom where we can bring in day program, group home, family, and that's an initial training session. However, after that, therapy is going to be necessary for the person to learn how to use their system. So at that point, you need to get speech and language therapy put into the ISP, and that will be covered under the speech and language therapy code, because at that point, the equipment is really just the modality for communication. It's language therapy. So it's not just training, it's language therapy, but it should include communication partner coaching. And again, once you're looking for the therapist, you want to make sure it's somebody who has some experience with AAC, because not all therapists do. And now we're at questions. Any questions or discussion?
All right, thank you, Barbara. We did receive some questions prior to the webinar, so we're just going to review those. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. So the first question we received, how can AAC devices improve social interactions for adults with IDD?
So, I think that's somewhat obvious almost, right? If you can't communicate, it's very hard to have social relationships. So I always say that for social emotional health, you need to have a communication system. If you're not able to fully communicate through speech, you need to be able to have a system. How can you engage with others if you can't communicate? And learning how to do that is something that's going to be part of your goals and objectives afterwards during intervention. But if you don't have a communication system, or if you speak but you're speaking unintelligibly, and everybody around you is pretending to understand you, that's not a true relationship either. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. The next question we got, in what ways do AAC devices support independence for adults with IDD?
Okay, so I touched on that a little bit before. We really want our users to become independent out in the community as much as possible. So again, how often do you see adults who are going to the doctor and their moms or their group home staff are speaking for them, or they're going to the grocery store and their support staff are speaking for them. They're going to a restaurant and somebody's ordering for them. So you really can't be independent. And to me, this is why I love what I do for a living, because everything comes back to communication. To me, nothing's more important than communication. Social relationships, functional communication, vocational. How can you have a job if you can't communicate? So I think in every way possible, it promotes independence.
I definitely agree. The next question that we got was, what are the cognitive benefits of using AAC devices for adults with IDD?
So again, I feel like it's very difficult. Ooh, hello? Ooh. What happened?
You're still with us.
I don't know what happened. You disappeared for a minute. Okay, I'm still here. Okay. Cognitive. So you can't really judge cognitive abilities when their communication is so impaired. However, sometimes having the visual display can also help with language and learning growth, because it's a visual cue for some people. So literacy can develop further when you have that tool. It can help to be used as a tool for further cognitive development. Try to get back to my slides here. Sorry, did you have other questions? Because there we go.
Yes, we have two more, or actually we have one more.
Okay.
Are AAC devices available in other languages?
Yes. So there are many different languages that are available. There's depending on the device, and that's something that we'll look at as part of an evaluation. So if there's a family that is primarily Arabic speaking, then that's going to be an important feature for me to consider, to find a system that is available in English and Arabic. If Spanish is the language, then we're going to make sure we find something that has Spanish. And what the system can be set up to do is with one button to go from one language to another. And it's really important to know that if a family's primary language is not English, then the individual should have access to both languages. That, some people are afraid that if someone has language impairment, that exposing them to two languages is going to be an impediment to language growth, but that's not true. And research shows that what you learn in one language will carry over to the other language.
All right, thank you, Barbara. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'm going to pass it over to Jessica.
I just want to share before we do that. I did put some resources here on this slide just so that I know you're going to have access to the slides. But this brochure, What is AAC? Is a brochure from the New Jersey Speech and Hearing Association. I'm a chair of the AAC committee, and we put this together, and it's available on our website also in other languages. You can feel free to share that with anybody who you think might benefit. And then I just listed Practical AAC, which is a website that has a blog. There's a lot of AAC information, and on the Communication Bill of Rights. And I just want to also, my last slide had my contact information. So I will bring that up, or I will share it with you. But go ahead, Jessica, you can talk.
Barbara, thank you. That was a fantastic presentation. I loved your videos. I loved learning about AAC. I really didn't know a lot about it. And I mean, just learning even that there are no prerequisites, I thought was so interesting. And I just really enjoyed it. I want to thank the group for joining today. This was our 5th free webinar that we've been hosting in a connection with a grant that we received with the support of Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill. All of the past webinars we've had have been uploaded to our YouTube channel. This webinar will be up in a week or so, and you can find it at on YouTube, JSTD LifeHomeTech. You can watch for an email next week sometime from LifeHomeTech@jscd.org. It'll have a link to that YouTube channel, as well as the slides from the presentation. We hope that you'll share what you've learned tonight with your friends and family. And I wanted to thank everyone for joining, and have a good night. Thanks.